So we challenge each of those community groups to take those back and to go through those checklists. The next step is then to make sure that Vision Dixie just doesn't fade away and become just a report on a shelf. And we do have the great opportunity in Washington County to have a very well-attended economic summit that happens annually in January. And that economic summit brings together many of the community, business, and general citizens at large to a central location for a day-long meeting. And as part of that economic summit, we have arranged to have what we call the Vision Dixie report card. And the implementation team puts on about a 90-minute presentation at least once a year now at this summit to describe, so where have we gotten to in our implementation processes. And at our last report to the community in January, we had a panel of mayors sitting up in front of the group reporting to the community what each of the municipalities have accomplished in implementing the Vision Dixie principles. Now, there has been some feeling out there that the community planning processes are already accomplishing the Vision Dixie principles, that they haven't had to go out and do a lot of fixes as they've gone through their checklists. They've said, hey, we're already doing that. We already have a sensitive areas overlay zone in our community. We're already working toward conservation subdivision development. We're already requiring that open space is incorporated into the design of subdivisions. And so they feel very strongly as communities that many of the principles are being accomplished. Now, getting away from the municipalities, again, much of the land in Washington County is federally managed, and some of the accomplishments that we are very proud to report there are, number one, that a lands bill did pass. It was the first such lands bill in Utah, and that lands bill is directing particular efforts that are incorporated in the Vision Dixie principles. One of those efforts is to identify public lands close to communities or inside communities that aren't serving a public management process that can be converted to private ownership. And that process is underway right now. A second one is that transportation routes on the public lands, especially BLM lands, are identified, and a motorized and non-motorized transportation plan for the public lands is being developed. And that's also underway as we speak. So we feel that we've accomplished some of the very basic desires of the process to begin with. Number one was to get the lands bill passed, to start implementing the lands bill, and to get the communities in Washington County converted to implementing those Vision Dixie principles. In general terms, we feel that Vision Dixie is getting a lot of attention. We see Vision Dixie mentioned a lot around our region in terms of a visioning process that's worked, that we don't want to forget what's going on there, and we see that there's a lot of public support for the implementation of the Vision Dixie principles. So I think that we've accomplished a lot of good things. I do have some lessons learned here. They are on your handout there. One of them is that we have to remember that elected officials drive this process at the municipal level, and that planning processes and regulations have to accommodate that vision. Sometimes in these groups, I feel like I need to take off my jacket and bare my back and take the stripes for being the guy who came around to the planning commissions in Cache Valley and wherever I worked and preached Euclidean zoning, the whole concept that we lived in the 20th century of dividing land uses and having a zone here for single family and a zone here for multifamily and a zone here for industrial uses. And now we're all, as professionals, repenting of that pattern of development that we've encouraged. But I also have to remind people that it was attorneys who developed Euclidean zoning, not planners, right? Attorneys developed. But we've had to overcome that whole century of Euclidean zoning concepts, that dividing land uses helps for better community development. And what we're seeing, as you've heard from Summer and others, is we need to integrate those uses more than we have in the past. We just had Dean Brenda Shear come down to Southern Utah. She's the Dean of Architecture and Planning at the University of Utah. She came to address the alumni chapter down there in Washington County. And the topic they gave her was, so what do you think about Vision Dixie as an academic and a very prominent planner out there? And I was very curious to go and hear her response, because Dean Shear did not participate in Vision Dixie, and she was quite removed in terms of, she watched from the University of Utah Vision Dixie happen. So I was very curious to see what her take on Vision Dixie would be. And her take on Vision Dixie was that it is implementing a new 21st century vision for land use in the West here in the United States. That we do need to preserve what's important first, as Summer indicated. Then we determine what the development pattern is going to be. But when we develop, we build neighborhoods, not subdivisions. And many of your local ordinances in your communities are focused on building subdivisions rather than neighborhoods. And so the challenge for you is to make that shift in your planning commission meetings that happen once or twice a month. Instead of taking the attitude that you're there to approve a conditional use permit or a plat, that you're there to build neighborhoods for the future generations in your community, and that what you do and the thinking that goes on is focused on building neighborhoods and not subdivisions. Now, making sure that the road in the subdivision stands up and it's not going to fall apart in 3 years is vital, and you can't let that go away. But as important is to make sure that the neighborhood that street is in is what you want your grandchildren and great-grandchildren to come back and say, hey, Grandpa was thinking right when this kind of development pattern happened. And I can't tell you how many counties and communities I've worked in that I can walk away and say, what were they thinking 30 years ago when this happened here? And I hope that we can begin a new 21st century trend that will allow our grandchildren to come back and say, yeah, they got it right back there in the beginning of the 21st century with these land use patterns. And I do have to emphasize, as you've heard all day long today, that planning is a process. It doesn't end. And many planning commissions get in the mode of thinking that, well, we've done our planning, we have the document, we've accomplished it, and we'll drive on, and no one ever looks at the plan again. I gave this challenge to a group similar to this in Cache Valley last November, and that is, if your planning commission isn't looking at your general plan, every planning commission meeting, that it is the basis by which you make decisions, then you may want to refocus the way your processes for doing meetings are. Again, you're not just a permitting entity that's there to to process permits and to approve plats. You're there to think about the future of your community for your children and grandchildren. And I hope that you take that challenge on and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I hope I've addressed what you wanted to see. Implementation of vision takes local effort, revision of your community processes, and a focus on that long-term vision in each and every planning commission meeting in your communities. Any questions that I might be able to address?